This is a topic I've been thinking about a lot lately, increasingly. And I'm hard at work on a new paper, and so I've integrated some of the new paper into this. But I think a question we're all struggling with and thinking about is this new technology, artificial intelligence. What does that imply about the future of economic growth, the macroeconomy, the labor market, et cetera? So I kind of wanted to share a bunch of different thoughts with you. Um, what I want to, my plan is to talk for 45 minutes and then leave 15 minutes for Q&A. Feel free to interrupt. On Zoom, it doesn't work so well, so I might not notice you, but definitely feel free to interrupt but I'll try to leave 15 minutes at the end. Yeah, so I said all this. This talk's based on several papers, an older paper that I wrote with Philippe Aghion and Ben Jones, and then some more recent stuff on existential risk, and then this new project I was referring to with Chris Tonetti. So it's kind of a mishmash, but hopefully it will whet your appetite to dive in more deeply. Okay, so in the paper with Philippe and Ben, we highlighted two themes. The first was that AI is just the latest form of an automation process that's been going on for 200 years, since the Industrial Revolution. So, automation is basically replacing labor with capital, replace labor with machines in particular tasks. And in the past, we did this with textile looms and steam engines and electric power. And in the future, we're already doing it with driverless cars here in San Francisco. You can ride in a Waymo. Hopefully you will next time you visit. Paralegals, pathologists, maybe researchers, maybe everyone. And kind of the spirit of the first point is we can use the past, what we've seen historically, to maybe tell us about the future. And that's really what we're picking up on with Chris on this past automation and the future of AI. We're diving into that even more heavily. Um, the second theme is that AI may be limited by Baumol's disease or bottlenecks or weak links. In the new paper, I think I'm going to shift much more into the weak link view. I think that's maybe more accurate, but in the earlier paper, we called it Baumol's disease or bottlenecks. The idea there is economic growth is constrained not by the things we're really good at, but instead by what's simultaneously essential and hard to improve. So we got lots of computers. Computers are amazing, right? We have access to 50 million times more transistors than we had 50 years ago. And yet, my productivity is not 50 million times higher. Maybe it's twice as high or something, maybe, right? Why? Well, because the computer's really good at helping me with a bunch of things, but I'm bottlenecked by all the things I'm bad at that the computer's not helping me with, okay? And those bottlenecks or weak links are the source of scarcity and hence earn high returns. And so I'll come back to all of these points, but these are themes that are going to show up throughout a lot of stuff I say today. Bunch of recent papers. So Acemoglu and Restrepo have been, just hugely important in this area. A top 5 article every year. I like their work a lot, so we're going to build on their work. Joseph Seira in 1998 had kind of the first insight about these task models in automation. So I think that paper is very important. David Amu and Mort Olson have some work that's valuable. Ben Jones, with a graduate student, Leo, have something that I'll comment on in a second as well. Okay, so let me go back. What this automation and Baumol's disease, how does it work in a model? So the simplest model, I think, that kind of makes a bunch of these points is what we started with in the Aghion, Jones, and Jones paper. And it's kind of laid out for you here. And if you look at these equations, most of them are actually very familiar, and you can see things that are slightly different. So we've got a final good production function that's CES in a bunch of tasks, a unit measure of tasks, a fixed range of tasks. We can talk more about that maybe later. Importantly, the elasticity of substitution among these tasks is less than 1. Okay, so this is a weak link model, not a love of variety model. Okay, the second equation tells you how those tasks are produced. And basically, all tasks could be produced with labor, but only some fraction of them, beta, can be produced with capital. So if they've been automated, if you've learned how to produce a task with capital, then you can use capital or labor. If you haven't automated it, you can only use labor. And for simplicity, 1 unit of labor and capital give you 1 unit of the task. Then if you look, the rest of the model is just perfectly plain vanilla simple. There's capital accumulation. You have to allocate your capital and labor across these tasks. And then, yeah, solo model for capital accumulation. Okay, so it's about as simple as it can be. And what's interesting to me as I've reflected on this model over time is it gives remarkably rich predictions. And I think the reason for that is because it nicely combines the interplay between complementarity and substitution. So if you think about the old-fashioned CES view of the world, f of bk comma al, where f is a CES function. I'll show you that in just a second. You have one elasticity of substitution, and capital and labor are either complements or substitutes. What's interesting here is the task production function has complements, and the production function of an individual task has substitutes. And so capital and labor interact in a more complicated fashion. And I think at its heart, that's kind of where a lot of the richness comes from. And so that's why even a simple model is really helpful here, just to illustrate those points. Okay, if you look at this environment, I've set it up so everything's nice and symmetric. So anything you can use capital on, you're going to use capital on. Let's suppose the parameters are such that that's true, but that's easy to enforce. And you're going to use the same amount of capital on each task and the same amount of labor on each task. And so KIT is going to be equal to KT divided by beta, and LIT, sorry, that's not highlighting so well, is going to equal L divided by 1 minus beta. Okay, you're going to allocate your capital and labor symmetrically. And so if you plug that into this first task production function, you get out something that starts to look more familiar, like a CES between capital and labor, where you've kind of got the green beta and the purple beta, right? And what the purple beta is doing, K divided by beta, if you've got K units of capital, and you spread it over the fraction of tasks beta, you put K over beta units of capital per task. And then the green beta is the measure of tasks that I shouldn't try to highlight here, is the measure of tasks that you're using capital on, right? So there's a purple beta and a green beta, and they could go in opposite directions, right? And the same thing's true on the labor side, but let me just focus on the capital side for a second. Okay, so there's this dilution effect which is the purple beta, and there's the doing more tasks with capital, that's the share parameter, the green beta. Okay, if you obviously you can combine the green and the purple beta, and when you combine them, actually you get our old friend f of bk comma al, where the b and the a are functions of beta. And I've just solved out here, b, the capital augmenting piece, is 1 over beta to a positive power, and the labor augmenting piece is 1 over 1 minus beta to a positive power. And so it turns out that with the elasticity of substitution less than 1, which is a really important assumption here, the dilution effect dominates. So here's the surprise. An increase in beta, if you automate more tasks, what happens? Well, it actually reduces the B. An increase in the fraction of tasks that can use capital is actually capital depleting rather than capital augmenting. The dilution effects dominate. You're spreading your capital more thinly. Also interesting, an increase in beta, automating more tasks, is actually labor augmenting, right? So an increase in beta raises A. And so now you see something, this is what I meant by kind of surprising, a richness. Beta is neither capital nor labor augmenting. It's a combination. It's a twist of the production function. An increase in beta is simultaneously capital depleting and labor augmenting. Okay. And so, yeah, so one question I love, back in the old days, so 20 years ago, before we had these task models, you would write down f of bkal, and you'd say things like, well, people wouldn't say it, but I used to wonder, okay, a new computer, you invent the personal computer. Is that a higher B or a higher A? And the answer was never clear. Is having a new computer like having two old computers? That would be like a higher B. Or is it like me having twice as much time? That would be a higher A. And I think for a long time, people thought there's a Greenwood-Hurwitz-Crusoe paper that's very famous, that a new computer was a higher B. And what's interesting now, this automation framework, no, automating stuff decreases B and increases A. So again, there's a richness here that I'll come back to. Okay, now the question is, if I want to make this dynamic, I need to say how tasks get automated. And what we did in the Aghion-Jones framework, which is a nice way to start, is let's just assume the following law of motion for beta. And this has a really nice interpretation. 1 minus beta is the fraction of tasks you've not yet automated. Right? 1 minus beta is what labor's doing. Assume a constant fraction of the stuff that you've not yet automated gets automated every year. Okay, that's theta. Right? And that's this law of motion, a constant fraction theta of the stuff you've not yet automated. 2% of the stuff you haven't automated gets automated every year. That's the law of motion. Beta is going to go to 1. Eventually, you're going to automate almost everything. There's always an epsilon remaining. You only go to 1 as t goes to infinity here. What happens to 1 minus beta? Well, beta is rising to 1. 1 minus beta is falling to 0. But what's interesting is 1 minus beta falls to 0 at a constant exponential rate, right? The growth rate of 1 minus beta is negative theta, right? So if theta is 2%, you're automating 2% of the stuff you've not yet automated. The share of tasks that have not been automated is falling at 2%, okay? And that's also useful. You know, we kind of know constant growth rates are going to be helpful if, you know, in a growth model. And so this has that feature, even though it doesn't look like it at first. Okay, so now putting everything together, we've got this reduced form production function, f of bk comma al, where b and a both depend on beta in the way we've talked about. Beta is going to 1. Over time, you're automating more and more stuff, asymptotically automating everything. That means b is also settling down at 1, right? Once beta gets to 1, b is just 1. But look at A. As beta goes to 1, A goes to infinity. And so this increase in automation, it's capital depleting, but that bottoms out. B stops at 1, but the labor augmenting continues forever. A grows at a constant exponential rate, because remember, 1 minus beta is falling at a constant exponential rate. So 1 over 1 minus beta is rising at a constant exponential rate. And so the growth rate, A dot over A, is just theta over 1 minus sigma. That's a positive number, right? So interestingly, this automation process where you might worry about Yuzawa, you know technological change has to be purely labor augmenting if you want a steady state. This on the surface didn't look purely labor augmenting at all. It's got this weird twist, but asymptotically, it turns out the automation process looks like purely labor augmenting technological change. So in particular, over time, as t gets big, b settles down at 1, a grows exponentially. Moreover, what about the capital share and the labor share? Well, when a constant fraction of the remaining goods get automated and sigma's less than 1, you get this asymptotic balance growth path, you satisfy Yuzawa, and in fact, the capital share levels off at 1/3 for the right parameter values, right? You don't go to 100% capital share or 0% capital share. You level off at 1/3. So it kind of looks like a neoclassical growth model, even though the micro foundations don't look anything like that, right? You get a model where the capital share settles down at 1/3. And if you ask why does this all work? Well, beta going to 1 says the capital augmenting piece ends eventually. Labor per task is rising exponentially, right? We've got a fixed amount of labor, L, the way I set it up, but you're putting your 100 units of labor on an exponentially declining set of tasks. You're concentrating your labor, and that looks like exponential growth in effective labor. Labor per task is rising exponentially. And so here, labor earns 2/3 of GDP, let's say, even though labor is working on a vanishing fraction of tasks. Why? Because of the Baumol effects, the bottlenecks, the weak links. We got computers doing a bunch of stuff, an increasing fraction of stuff. Computers are incredibly productive, incredibly cheap. The labor is the bottleneck. The labor is the constraint. And so with elasticity of substitution less than one, the scarce factor gets the returns. Labor's the scarce factor, and so labor's share of GDP remains high. And what's interesting about this is just that, people worry that automation is going to drive the labor share to zero, and it definitely could, but this at least suggests, well, don't assume it's going to so quickly, because if labor's the bottleneck can see its price rise a lot. Okay, so that was in the Aghion Jones and Jones paper, and that was a cool result. There's a limitation, which is everything I've showed you now is as cool as it is. It only happens as beta goes to 1, and it's not obvious that the U.S. for the last 150 years is well approximated by beta equals 1. Probably not, and so maybe this doesn't help us understand the last 150 years, as intriguing as it is. Okay, and that gave rise to the Ben Jones and Liu AER paper. And what they did is they took the setup we've got now and added one twist to it. And that one twist was really important, because they showed how to get a balanced growth path today, even with beta less than 1. Okay, and the twist they added is better computers, right? Let the task production function be yi equals z times k plus l, and let z get better, right? Capital augmenting technological change. So the computers can get better. And I won't go through the details, but it turns out in that model, the capital share is, roughly speaking, beta divided by z. So as you do more tasks with capital, that causes the capital share to go up. But as computers get better, that causes the capital share to go down. And that might describe modern economies. Why? Well, beta is going up and z is going up. But if they go up at the same rate, then the capital share can be constant. You can have increasing automation, computers getting better, and the capital share remains stable at a third, even without complete automation. Right? So that was a very cool result. Notice still there's something a little puzzling about it, which is eventually beta levels off at 1, but computers probably keep getting better, right? And so in that setup, these bottleneck effects still dominate, and you might think actually that the capital share could fall to 0. Okay. And it's really just, computers are getting plentiful, the price of computers is falling, and with the elasticity of substitution less than 1, the plentiful factor sees its share decline, the scarce factor sees its share rise. Okay, that's not something they emphasize. They have just the beta and the z growing at the constant rates. They rig it in some way to make that happen, but it's not obvious that would happen. You might guess maybe the capital share could fall to 0, and that's also intriguing. So one of the key points I make with Chris Tonetti in our new paper is the following question. So what's happened to the factor income share of computers over the last 50 years? Okay. And what's interesting about this is, you remember the capital share, the labor share. You can look those up in the national income and products accounts. Well, you can also look up the components of capital, right? So you can divide capital into equipment versus structures. And you can divide equipment into information technology and everything else. And so you can kind of look up, if you look in the right place, what's happened to the share of GDP paid as a return to information technology. Okay. On the one hand, computers are everywhere now. That might lead you to think the factor share would go up. On the other hand, computers are like cheaper. That could make the factor share go down. What is it? Here's the data. During the dot-com boom of the late 1990s, the factor share of income to computers went up from 2.5 to 3. But over the last 25 years, the income share paid to computers has fallen from 3 to 2, 3% to 2%, right? So computers are everywhere. Automation is going on, and yet the share of GDP paid to computers is going down, not up. And that's saying the price declines dominate, very much consistent with the sigma less than 1 view of the world. Okay, so that this again raises this question: are we so sure that the labor share is going to go to 0, Maybe not. Computers are going to do a lot. Here, computers do asymptotically everything. And yet, because computers are so plentiful and labor scarce, the labor share can remain high. Okay, so that's intriguing. Okay, how am I doing on time? Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about, and we talked about this in the AJJ paper as well, is what if you automate the idea production function? Don't just automate the goods production function, automate the idea production function. And a simple way to do it, to see what happens, is, okay, make the goods production function y equals a times L. A is the stock of ideas. There's no capital. So we're only going to have an idea production function that gets automated just to keep things simple. In the new paper, we kind of do both things at the same time. So here's, my favorite idea production function. New ideas are produced with old ideas and with a bunch of tasks now. So the tasks show up inside the idea production function. And otherwise, it works just like the model I've shown you so far, right? Let beta be the fraction of tasks that are automated. What can you use capital on? What can you use labor on? So you get this F of BK, and now I'm calling it C times S. S for scientists, S for researchers, and C is just because I've used A as ideas. It's bad notation, but C is the labor augmenting piece in the idea production function. So B is 1 over beta, C is 1 over 1 minus beta, just like before. Okay. Well, with sigma less than 1, again, the scarce factor is going to dominate. And so this CES production function, as time goes on, looks like a constant times C times S. Right? Because your B and your K are growing, you're getting plenty of capital. And so you're bottlenecked by the labor in the idea production function. So interestingly, with continuous automation, this ultimately looks like kind of very close to what I always write down as my idea production function. You got scientists producing ideas. You've got this extra C in there. That's the new piece. But what you know from this, if you want to balance, if you want to ask what happens to growth in the long run, the growth rate of A, here's the way to think about it. If the growth rate of A is constant, then the growth rate of A dot is also constant and has the same growth rate as A. And so you get my usual population growth over 1 minus phi, right? Growth rate of scientists, growth rate of researchers over 1 minus phi. The intriguing thing here is you've also got this GC term. In other words, and Philippe was really excited about this, even with no population growth, even if the growth rate of scientists is 0, you get positive growth. Why? Because our constant number of scientists are working on a smaller and smaller set of tasks. And so scientists per task grows exponentially at rate GC, and that can sustain growth even without population growth. So that's an intriguing finding. Interestingly, you can ask, does AI raise the growth rate? Well, automation's been going on for hundreds of years. If theta is constant, so GC is going to be theta over 1 minus sigma. If theta is constant, well, then it doesn't accelerate growth. If somehow AI leads the automation rate theta to increase, that could raise growth rates. Okay, so that's kind of what you get from the bottleneck view. Of course, there's an extreme version. If you assume all research tasks get automated in finite time, so imagine machines can produce ideas and you don't need any labor, then explosions are possible, right? You can get infinite income in finite time, and we mentioned that was possible. That surprised me, but it's definitely possible, and when you see why, it's very intuitive. So machines produce ideas, ideas gives you more machines, and because of Roemer's non-rivalry, because of increasing returns, that's a virtuous circle that explodes. So you can get a growth explosion if you have 100% automation. And even with a little bit less, I think you can get it because of the increasing returns. Okay, so this leads me, I want to step back now and talk about kind of two extreme views of the future. So what's growth going to look like? And I want to give you an accelerationist perspective and a Baumol bottleneck perspective and kind of talk through the stories and how I think about them and then show you some simulations. Okay, so first let me give you, if you read AI Twitter, there are a lot of people who think that things are going to explode. I'm somewhat sympathetic to that, right? So what would it look like to live in a world where machines give us ideas, ideas give us machines, and growth explodes? Well, I think the way you would think about the next 2 decades is in the near term, we get productivity boosts from AI, especially in software. And I'm sure you've all seen this already. Like Cursor, ChatGPT, Claude, they're amazingly good at coding. I was just asking ChatGPT Pro to solve a problem I was having with my code this morning, and it thought for 10 minutes, and I'm looking forward to plugging it in and seeing if it fixed my problem. So 25% productivity improvements in software already. Dario Amodei, people say 90% of Anthropic's code is going to be written by AI by, the middle of next year, maybe the end of this year. Is it plausible that in the next decade, we'll have AI agents that can automate most coding? Sure, that's possible. Again, Dario Amodei thinks like that's a year away at most. Once you have AI that can automate most coding, you ask it, hey, code up better AI algorithms. Code up better algorithms for designing computers. Code up better things. These algorithms are themselves ideas. They're infinitely usable. And so you can get these virtuous circles, at least within software. Software gives you better software, gives you more software, gives you better software. So explosion in software. And once you have software, AI agents doing amazing things, well, you can think of those as virtual research assistants. Anything I can ask a remote worker to do on their computer, I can ask AI to do. These virtual research assistants will, spit up billions of them in the cloud. They run 100 times faster than us, and we ask them to invent new ideas. Again, only ideas that can be invented intellectually, but, better computer chips, better algorithms, design robots virtually and test them out in a simulated world. Think about new medical technologies, AlphaFold and descendants of AlphaFold. And it can tell us to run experiments in the real world as well to help us improve things. Once you have better robots and you have AI running the better robots, then you automate the whole physical world as well. And once you're automating all cognitive work and all physical work, yeah, it seems like growth probably is much higher, right? So this story, I think, if this were to happen, and again, each step seems like it could happen, this has the potential to raise growth rates substantially over the next 25 or 50 years, let's say. Okay. Sooner than that, I think we can debate, but definitely possible. So let me give you the downside. So that's the most optimistic kind of scenario, I think. Let me paint the pessimistic scenario as well. So I think the pessimistic scenario has two legs. The first is from economic history. We kind of know everything takes longer than you expect, right? Paul David and the steam engine, the electric dynamo, or the Solow paradox, we see computers everywhere, but in the statistics, you invent these new general purpose technologies, electricity, information technology, and they take 50 years to diffuse throughout the economy, and importantly, for all the complementary innovations to incorporate computers throughout our production processes. Okay, so the lesson of economic history is these things take decades. They don't happen instantaneously. That's the first point. The second point is, as we said from the beginning, automation's been going on for 150 or 200 years, but growth rates haven't sped up during that 150 years, right? So now I have to show you my favorite picture in all of economics. I'm not sure I've ever given a talk where I didn't show this picture, right? Economic growth in the US, 150 years, straight line with a slope of 2%, right? You just don't get too far from that straight line. And that, the more I look at this graph, the more remarkable it is. The more you think about it, the harder it is to believe. But let me tell you the way it affects our discussion today. In 1870, we barely had any electricity. We were just figuring out how to use electricity. Over the next 50 years, it transformed the economy. And yet, 2% growth, right? Then we invent vacuum tubes and transistors and antibiotics and computers and personal computers and the internet. These fundamental innovations, none of them changed the growth rate, right? So automation's been going on for a long time. The way we do research is very different from the way we used to do research, and yet 2% growth the whole period. So in some sense, one interpretation of that fact is within any general purpose technology, ideas get harder to find. The steam engine runs out of steam, and you need the next general purpose technology to keep growth from slowing. So had we not invented the internet, presumably we would have fallen off that 2% trend and growth would have been lower, right? So with this version of things, maybe these great ideas are what kept growth from slowing, and maybe AI is just the latest general purpose technology that lets us maintain 2% growth for another 50 years. Okay? That to me is kind of the pessimistic view of AI. I'm probably in between these two stories, and I'll show you that next. It used to be before 2 weeks ago, I didn't have the simulations, and so I stopped it here. But now this paper with let me see. Let me come back to this. You'll probably ask a question about that. Let me just continue with the paper with Chris. So what we're doing in this paper is, as I said, looking at past automation to help us think about the future of AI. And so the question we start with is how much of growth historically in motor vehicles, software, agriculture, retail trade, in the aggregate, how much of growth in each of these sectors was due to automation? We find more than 50%, right? And in particular, what happens is machines are getting better, computers are getting better, and people are getting better. But the rate at which machines get better is much faster. In particular, so these task models put a Z on the L and a Z on the K, right? That the Ben Jones and Liu had the Z on the K, put a Z on the L as well. Asymoglu or Restrepo do these kind of things too. We go out and measure them, right? So on the L, ask yourself, take the same person. So the education is taken out. We adjust for different kinds of labor. Take the same person 50 years ago and the same person today and ask, how much better is that person at inverting matrices by hand, right? With no computers, with no capital, because this is labor doing the task. Well, not that much better. So people getting better is a slow thing. Maybe it's 0.5% per year. But in our growth accounting, we back out machines are getting better. The Z that multiplies the K, that seems to be growing at more than 5% per year. So the gain from automation, the key gain is that you can switch from slowly improving humans to rapidly improving machines. Okay, that's the key gain. And if we keep automating things and we automate the idea production function and the machines keep getting better at 5% per year, what happens to economic growth in the future? Okay, so I'm going to show you some simulations. You shouldn't trust any of these numbers. The numbers are definitely going to change, but I learned two things that surprised me from this simulation, so I at least wanted to share them with you. So yeah, don't trust these numbers. We haven't put them on the web yet because they're definitely going to change. But I think that qualitatively the effects are going to be there. Okay, so here's the first graph. So this is income per person on a log scale. So this is the straight line is the 2% trend from the past. If we continued on the 2% trend, we'd be in that orange dashed line. And instead, what our simulation says is no, growth is accelerating. Growth is exploding. And let me go to the next graph. Here's the growth rate. You see the 2%. If we stayed on the 2%, that would be it. But you can see growth is exploding. The growth rate's getting higher and higher. And if I ran it another 100 years, growth would go up to 50% and then 100% and then infinity. So we are exploding even in this world with bottlenecks. And we built in enough bottlenecks that I thought for sure growth would not explode. And even then it still explodes. Okay, that's the first surprise. I didn't expect it to happen. But notice the explosion happens really slowly. Okay, by 2040, we're growing at 2.3% per year instead of 2% per year. By 2060, 40 years later, 2.9%. Again, don't trust the exact numbers. The cumulation, the numbers on this graph, the 1.03 is relative to the orange line, the dashed line. So in 2040, with this automation, AI, we're 3% richer than we would be had we just stuck to the 2% trend. By 2060, we're only 16% richer. So surprise one, explosion is happening. We're in the middle of an explosion. Surprise two, it takes a century for it to really show up in a big way. Now, 50 years, right? It's surprisingly small. Now, the numbers are sensitive. So if I thought AI is not just like past forms of automation, but it actually might be a little bit better. So what I do on the next set of lines is I say, suppose AI also, in addition to, it's automating ideas. So the idea production function is being automated already. That's in there. But let me make it 20% better at automating ideas. So just the idea production function shifts up by 20%. And this is just to show you how the model works. Now the explosion happens sooner, right? Now we're at 3.5% growth in 2040, 2.9% in 2020. And you can see the explosion more vividly here. The level effects, again, 27% richer than we would have been in 2040, twice as rich as we would have been by 2060. So you can see the explosion is happening. Anything that brings it forward makes it show up. But even in this case, it does take a while. 25 years, having 1% faster growth for 25 years is a big deal, but it's not, the robots are replacing us all in a decade, right? So anyway, the exact numbers are going to change, but I think things that are robust is the explosion's more likely than I thought, even in a world with lots of bottlenecks. But those bottlenecks mean the explosion takes a long time. And so I think this is the weak link view of the world. You've got a chain, you've got a bunch of weak links. And suppose we have 100 links in the chain. Suppose I make 50 of them infinitely strong. Well, I'm still bottlenecked by the other weak links. The overall strength of the chain is just limited by the weakest link, not by the strength. And so that's what's going on here. You're automating stuff and you're infinitely good, let's say, at the stuff you automate, fine, but you're still bottlenecked by your weak links. And it's only as you start automating everything that really things take off. And this is with an elasticity of substitution of a half. I'm not assuming Leontief here, but it's still this slow. Okay, how are we doing? 5 more minutes. All right, let me talk about one more topic, which is this existential risk, which I think we should be taking much more seriously than we are, and I want to make the case for that for you. In particular, I think economic analysis has a lot to say about these catastrophic risks. So there are two versions of existential risk that people talk about, and I think they're both probably worth taking seriously. One is the bad actor view of the world. So imagine ChatGPT 8, and imagine it's this great oracle that can answer any question, but it has no agency. So imagine we control the oracle, it's not going to kill us all, but it can answer any question. Well, could a bad actor, could some terrorist ask it to design a virus that's more lethal than Ebola and takes 3 months to display symptoms? Yeah, that could happen. And nuclear weapons were manageable because they were very rare. Only 2 red buttons existed, and we managed not to press those red buttons. But if we have 8 billion red buttons, can we be sure that no one presses it? That seems like a very dangerous world. And then there's the more extreme, the alien intelligence interpretation. So suppose we found out this afternoon there's a spaceship on its way to Earth passing Pluto. How would we feel about that? We'd be pretty excited. And then you'd realize, well, maybe I shouldn't be fully excited, because when advanced civilizations or advanced species on Earth encounter less advanced species, it often doesn't end well. And so I was on a panel with this computer science professor at Berkeley, Stuart Russell, who's the co-author of one of the leading machine learning textbooks for graduate students. And he had a quote that I liked a lot. He said, "How do we have power over entities more powerful than us forever?" And forever is a key word there. I'm not sure there's a good answer to that question. Okay, so I think this catastrophic risk thing is something we should take seriously. My most recent paper on this asked the following question: how much should we be spending to help mitigate this catastrophic risk, to protect against it? How much should we be investing in AI safety? And on the one hand, I kind of knew a point which is relatively obvious when you think about it, that look, if we have billions of people a year and lots of future generations, then in some sense, our decision today affects trillions of future people. And yeah, we could invest arbitrarily large amounts if you care about future generations. Okay, so that point is there. I knew that I wasn't going to write a paper about that because I think that was pretty obvious and pretty easy to understand. On the other hand, what if you don't care about future generations? How much should we be investing? And here, the key thing that led me to write the paper was the realization that we just recently faced a version of this question. The COVID pandemic was a version of this. We all faced a mortality risk, or at least we thought we did, of 0.3%. Right? There was a tiny chance it would kill you if you got it, 0.3%. We spent 4% of GDP mitigating that risk, not going outside, shutting down the economy. By revealed preference, I think the AI risk is at least 0.3%. Maybe we should be spending at least that much, and we're not spending anything close to that amount. So are we massively underinvesting? Now you might ask, well, did we overspend on COVID just because we did it? Maybe we made a mistake. No, if anything, we underspent. So a better intuition, the value of life, right? If you look on the Department of Transportation in the United States or the Environmental Protection Agency's webpage, they have the value of life that they use when they're deciding how much to make things safe, how much to require seatbelts or bank highways or install pollution scrubbers, et cetera. They use a $10 million value of life. To avoid a mortality risk of 1%, if you value your life at $10 million, you're willing to pay $100,000, 1% of 10 million. $100,000 is a year's per capita GDP. So if you thought this X risk is realized over 2 decades, 20 years, you could potentially justify an annual investment of 5% of GDP if you thought the mortality risk, if the risk was 1%. So the point here is that even from a selfish perspective, ignore future generations. Just from saving our own lives, life is so valuable. We really do want to protect against these bad outcomes. And so, yeah, we could easily justify spending more. And there's a paper to deal with the fact that how effective is the mitigation. But let me not talk about that. Okay, let me conclude now. I'm out of time. So a question I like is, how much did the internet change the world between 1990 and 2020? I think a lot. How much will AI change things over a 30-year period? More or less? I suspect the answer is more. And it's useful to say, how many internets is AI worth? And importantly, just because the change takes 30 years instead of 5 years doesn't mean the effects will not ultimately be large, but the bottlenecks, the weak links, the history of economics is that these things take longer than you think. Second point, yeah, should we be spending a third of 1% of GDP to mitigate these risks, like $100 billion? I think we probably should. And we're probably spending something like $2 billion now. So maybe underinvesting by a factor of 50. Okay, let me stop there and open it up for questions. Thanks very much for your listening.
Thank you. If anyone has questions, please unmute yourself and you can speak.
Well, I had a question regarding the first model that you've mentioned. Can you hear me, by the way?
Yes, I can.
Perfect. Yeah. Is regarding the beta in which, well, I usually use AI because I'm a research assistant and I often see the limitations within AI. And I've also seen that we have the efficient compute frontier, in which we have a limitation that we've observed of the capabilities of AI. And I wanted to ask if within this model you have considered maybe capping beta to a lower number than 1, and what would be those implications and the change from the following conclusions that you previously mentioned.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I totally am with you that maybe you don't like in this the law of motion I gave you, the beta dot is theta times 1 minus beta. You constantly automate 2% of the stuff you haven't yet automated. Beta goes to 1. Maybe that's too optimistic. Maybe there's some tasks that can't be automated, or that we choose not to automate. I think the choose is important there. So one of the slides I didn't talk about was the labor market. And an example I like is my iPhone can beat Magnus Carlsen at chess. And yet chess has never been more popular than it is now. People watch chess on YouTube, on the internet. It's incredibly popular, right? So there may be some tasks that we reserve for humans. And so an interesting question is, okay, what if you don't fully automate? Or what if we can't fully automate? And so in these simulations, part of what we're doing now is saying, suppose that 5% of tasks can never be automated. What do the dynamics look like then? And what turns out to be true, I think, and this is what we're finding, is that for the next 20 or 30 years, it looks like what we see. It's very robust. So what happens in the limit? Do we automate everything or do we only automate 97% of things? For the next 20 or 30 years, the path looks very similar regardless of that future. But obviously, as you go out to the 100 years, does growth explode or not? That's very sensitive to that question. So that's kind of where we're going with that result.
Okay, thank you.
Great.
So I actually wanted to ask you about environmental constraints, right? You talked about the threats of AI, and I think an interesting point is how we're going to deal with our scarcity of resources and the resources AI needs. So what's your view on that? Because
Yeah.
we are at a very critical moment, right? We are at the same time we're talking about AI taking over the world. We're talking about the environmental dangers we're facing. So please, if you can share your thoughts about that.
Yeah, very important question. So I'm working on another project called Optimal Population. How many people should we have in the world? And a question I like, a thought experiment I like, is what goes wrong if we have a world of 100 billion people? And environmental considerations are high on the list of things that people raise. And so we're kind of looking into that. What I think is true, so there's, if you look at, like, for example, the work by Golosov, Krusell, Hassler, and Savinsky, they have an econometric paper, and I think a JPE paper follow-up. They're kind of taking these climate damages very seriously and asking how big of a constraint are those going to be on our future. I think the answer is kind of solar panels and nuclear fusion. With the right technologies, we can stop burning greenhouse gases. We can stop polluting the atmosphere. There's plenty of energy coming from the sun and from splitting atoms or merging atoms. And it's really a technological problem. So I suspect if we have this great AI that invents new ideas, the first ideas we're going to ask it to invent are better solar panels and nuclear fusion. And the solar panels, by the way, that's happening now, right? The solar panels benefit from Moore's law, and then they fall even faster than that. And so I do think, and I think this is what comes out of the Golosov, Hassler, Krusell, and Savinsky work as well. The problem with climate damages is a political problem and not a technological problem. The technologies are kind of already there and getting better. And if we just do the right thing, those problems will be solved. And so you might say, okay, if we don't do the right thing, those problems could get very bad. And so I think it is a political economy problem, probably more than an economics problem or a technology problem. But it's totally an important thing.
Thank you.
Let me share one more slide since you guys, the one I skipped, which I like a lot. Let me go back to this because I think there's one other point that I didn't make that, okay, let's see. Here we go. The labor market. So my kids are very concerned about the labor market and are they going to have jobs? And rightly so. I think that's a valid thing to be concerned about. So I don't work on that topic. I'm not a labor economist. So this is my one slide on this, and it's very speculative. So don't take it too seriously, but I think it's interesting. So the first point is these bottlenecks and weak links have an impact on jobs as well. Jobs are collections of complementary tasks. And even if AI automates a large share of the tasks, you still have humans doing the remainder. So 10 years ago, Geoff Hinton argued, hey, no one should ever train as a radiologist because in 5 years, i.e. 5 years ago, we're not going to have any more radiologists because the AI model is going to make them unnecessary. It's going to completely automate away radiologists. In fact, radiologists are paid more than ever before, and they're still very successful, right? Why is that? Well, I think it's the weak link view of the world. Radiologists do a bunch of tasks. Sure, the AI is good at half the tasks, but that just frees up the radiologist to spend more time on the things that the AI can't do. And that makes the radiologist more valuable rather than less valuable. Now, again, it doesn't mean you can't be completely automated away. Some people will be, but this point that the weak links apply to many jobs as well helps me understand the radiologist's factor. Second point, the world where AI changes everything is a world where GDP is incredibly high. And you saw that in the simulations. It may take a while, but GDP goes through the roof. And so the size of the pie being available for redistribution is enormous. And so, again, it's a political economy problem rather than an economics problem. The size of the pie will be big. Next point, as we get richer, we naturally work less. And that's a good thing, not a bad thing. In our models, work is a bad, not a good. That's why they have to pay us to do it. And so taking more leisure in this world of abundance is probably a good thing. And my analogy for this is retirement, right? Retirees seem to be happy people. They don't say, oh, I don't have any meaning in my life because I'm not doing a job from 9 to 5. They say, oh, great, I get to travel and see friends and hang out in the piazza and watch FC Barcelona and, arts and music and sports. And so I think the retirement view, if we solve the distribution problem, that's at least one way of seeing some optimism. But I know there are reasons to push back against that too. But I think these are some forces that I think about when I think about the labor market. I do think it might kill us all. So I'm not incredibly optimistic, but I do think if it doesn't kill us all, that maybe it works out pretty well.
Someone in the chat mentioned if you could share the paper that you were talking about. I think it's the Econometrica one, the environmental.
Oh, sure. I won't find it now. It's Mike Golosoff, John Hassler, Per Krusell, and Alit Savinsky, Econometrica 2014, and I think it's got fossil fuels in the title or something. And then they have a follow-up paper in the JPE. I forget the title of that one now. But I think those two papers, they're nice papers. They're for my taste, they're at the sweet spot of having kind of an elegant model that you can kind of understand, but speak to kind of really important questions. So those are great papers to look at.
Yeah, and let me ask you a quick question about the two scenarios that you mentioned, the optimistic one and the more pessimistic one. Do you think there's a way that we can, like a variable that we can look at right now that could indicate whether we are in one world or the other? You mentioned that the simulations look similar, but maybe there's some way that we can distinguish these two?
I think it's hard, actually. That's I mean I'm running more simulations, so I don't know, but my sense is for the next 20 years, the path looks pretty similar, regardless of what happens a long way out. So whether we can automate 100% or 98% of tasks determines whether growth explodes or growth slows down. And importantly, I didn't emphasize this, but this comes out too. If you can only automate 98% of the tasks, then you get to the 98%, and then labor is still doing 2% of the tasks forever. Labor's the bottleneck. Labor's only getting better at 2%, at 0.5% per year. And so growth actually slows dramatically. The growth rate, which rises for a while, as you saw in those simulations, eventually it peaks and turns around and goes down to 0.5% per year. So it really is like, it's almost like what happens asymptotically to automation matters a lot for your future 200 years from now. It doesn't matter much for your future over the next 20 years. And I'm not sure what you'd look at, because you have to sort of ask yourself, do you think we can automate everything? I mean, that's the right question. I think actually you can automate everything. So I think it'll be feasible to automate everything. And so I think the explosion is definitely on the table. Then the Magnus Carlsen point, will there be some tasks we reserve for people? The arts, I want to watch, I want to watch the best performer sing songs and dance ballet and maybe even paint paintings. Maybe we value things because humans do it, right? We watch humans run races. We don't watch, I mean, I guess we watch cars do races, but it's the human driving the car, right? We value things because humans do them. That's the kind of thing that potentially could slow growth. On the other hand, the substitutes versus complementarity matters a lot. The Magnus Carlsen playing chess, that's a final good that I think is substitutable with me putting on my virtual reality glasses. Or let me go back to, I saw Taylor Swift in concert with my daughter. That was great. We were pretty far from the stage, and it was really fun. So you could ask me, maybe I'm going to value Taylor Swift concerts in the future. I think that's true. On the other hand, if we could all put on virtual reality goggles, and me and my daughter and all my friends, it would be as if we're standing, 5 feet away from Taylor Swift, me and just my friends, and maybe a lot of other people in the background, and we're dancing together, singing Taylor Swift songs. That is substitutable. It's a virtual Taylor Swift, so it's not the real thing, but the experience feels maybe better. So I don't know, but these are the kind of questions that you have to think about. But yeah, they're totally the right questions too.
Sorry, I have another question. When talking about these types of automating everything and things, I cannot avoid thinking about the WALL-E film that I saw as a kid, where the humans are just consumers of entertainment or everything else, and this type of thinking always drives me there, right? And talking about this type of human experience got me thinking about something that I thought during these latest slides that you shared about the cost and the investment that we should be doing in preventing the catastrophes from AI. How do you think that we could take into account the fact that maybe this massive, or well, as you said, underinvestment in COVID, but how this investment of COVID was maybe driven by this also human emotion of immediacy of the risk, right? And how we could model this type of immediacy of the risk on our recommendation for spending with respect to the AI risks.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. I think the WALL-E question is a question that sticks with all of us, especially in the modern world with social media, right? So social media and young people, there are many good things about social media, but there are definitely some bad things. And I think, in the US, you see those, probably in other countries, you see those too. And so the WALL-E future is something that I think should worry all of us. I do think just like social media is a tool, and some people get sucked in and have very negative experiences. Some people don't. So social media for me, as far as I can tell, seems to be a good. I get to follow FC Barcelona on Twitter. I get to follow AI Twitter. And then otherwise, I enjoy the outdoors at Stanford and don't live the WALL-E world. So I do think it's in some sense a choice. One thing I'll say, once we have this super intelligent AI, if it's aligned with our values, we could say, look, we're very worried about the WALL-E world. Help us avoid that. And it'll have great ideas. It'll be able to, it'll be more brilliant than any of us, or as brilliant as the best people. And we can tell it, help us design systems so that we don't abuse the AI and get stuck in this WALL-E world. And so I do think there are solutions, and people and AI that's smart can help us solve those problems. So at least that's how I think about it. But I totally agree. We should be worried about this because, yeah.
Okay, I think we're out of time. It was a great pleasure. Thank you so much. And yeah.
Yeah, no, thanks very much for letting me talk with you for the hour, and good luck with everything. I'm really glad you have this society. I think getting together smart, talented students and let them think about these important topics and explore economics, really, really valuable. So keep up the good work, and I look forward to meeting you all in person sometime.
Thank you
Great.
very much.
Great.
Thank you
Thanks a
everyone for
lot.
joining us, and have a good weekend, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.